So I'm very honored, and dare I say surprised, to become the Chancellor of the University of Southampton. If you had asked me as a child if this was even possible, I would have laughed in your face, as would my parents. As a young student, academic intelligence was not my forte. Canoeing, yes. Academia, no. To be honest, I really didn't take full advantage of my early school years as far as education goes, but I did have my specialities at the time, which all pointed to a very bleak future. These were I hope you understand this. I excelled at learning how to pierce people's ears in the girls' loo, also how to fake an epileptic fit to get out of gym. Thank you. But my triumph was putting sardines under the lighting fixtures on the ceiling, so my entire high school had to be evacuated. Thank you. On one of those days where the parents have to come in and get a report on your progress, one of my teachers told my parents that I was either going to become a comedian or a serial killer. The word dyslexia had not yet been discovered, so I was simply considered stupid. And in many ways, I lived up to my label. I was informed that on some of my early test scores, they were not dissimilar to those of a houseplant, had they taken the same test. I don't know if you have these types of tests in this country, but in the States, they ask questions like, which is the odd one out? An elephant, a giraffe, a rhinoceros, or an avocado? Anybody? All the same to me. I mean, they all breathe. But I had a skill that made me successful. I didn't know it at the time, which is I really knew how to fail. And those of us that fail, we're the ones that fight, and then we try again. And then we fail, and then we try again. I wish teachers would teach that at schools, how to fail, because we're the ones who think out of the box, and they don't even know there is a box. Every new invention was always met with derision. People tried to fight original ideas, mainly because they didn't come up with them. So all those people I went to high school with who were considered the winners, who got straight A's and they were, sports gods, many of them are now on drip feeds on Valium. I think the prom queen is still in rehab because they just can't deal with slipping from the top tiers. See, failure, as you know, comes to all of us at one form or another at some point in our lives. So we professional flops survive and thrive, while the alphas simply crumble because they didn't have the failure muscles. A flexible mind is also a sign of a winner, far greater than grades, because the only thing you can really depend on in this life is change. Not only from the outside world, but our neuronal networks are always shape-shifting with each thought, experience, and feeling. Our minds are more verb than noun. To insist on holding on to some belief that's immovable is delusional. As a matter of fact, if you want my definition of certain pathologies of mental illnesses, it's when somebody believes their reality is the only reality. If that describes you, you're either very disturbed or you're my president. By the way, I interviewed him about 15 years ago. 15 years ago. Did you see it? No. Do you know who I am? Or am I just standing here with a hat? Because you had nobody else to listen to. Okay, well, for those of you who didn't see it, you can Google it, okay? Not now. Anyway, I interviewed him, and we were at about 33,000 feet in his private jet. And the first thing he says to me is he wants to be the next president of the United States. So I started laughing. And he said, that's it, I don't want any more from her, land the plane. So the pilot lands the plane, and now my crew and I are in Arkansas. We had no plans on going to Arkansas. Anyway, I'm not going to do the whole thing because clearly people got dressed up for something. But I'll just tell you at the end, at the end, we finally hunted him down. It's in the program. And so I ended up next to Melania because he was judging a beauty contest. And I was standing really close to her so I could hear the ocean. Nothing. That's being kind. Okay. So I had my own show on the BBC for 25 years, and then, there were new heads, finally, of the BBC who had just been born, and they didn't really understand what it was I did, so I left. Don't assume you'll forever have your job, because there's always somebody coming up behind you, and that is nature. It would be like a leaf refusing to fall off a tree when it's time for a new one to grow in its place. At some point, you're going to have to get down off that branch, which brings me to another feature which trumps higher grades. It's the ability to reinvent yourself throughout your life, because now we live so long. People used to be dead at 30, so they only had time for one job, but now we just go on and on and on. So there's many chapters, so you really have to stay tuned into what excites you at any given time, and there's different stages in your life. Those who hold on just because it's what they're used to, or it's easy to do the same old, those are the ones that are the losers. No matter how many A stars you have, really, it's always about jumping and letting go, however painful, and it is painful. So, as I said, about 12 years ago, I lost my mojo in the job, and you could start to see it while I was interviewing people. So I thought, well, let go. Leave the party before it leaves you. And I was always interested before that in the brain and in the mind. So I dropped the TV job and crashed a course at UCL in neuroscience. And everybody in the class was 21. So I told them I had that disease where you age really fast. And then we started partying. I even dated a few people. And then they found out I really was old. But it didn't matter, because I was the one with the car. So there you go. And then around 12 years ago, as I say, around the same time, I had a serious depression, which I've had most of my life, but this was the tsunami of all time. So I thought, you know what, I got to figure out how to deal with this, because the longer you have them, the longer they go on, and the deeper they are. So I thought, I'm going to figure out a way that I can deal with this. And I'd seen every shrink known to mankind. So I thought, the buck stops here. I went to Regents and got my master's in psychotherapy. So really, I went there to just see who was ripping me off. Anyway, I did research it. I became obsessed with it. I went through journals and every science book I could find, and research and everything. And I found out at the time, to my surprise, it's not 100%, but what had the most impressive evidence at that time, besides medication in certain situations, what had the best, most empirical evidence for depression, anxiety, panic attacks, stress, was cognitive-based therapy. Not for everybody, but it had good results, and mindfulness, which I never heard of before, and it sounded way too vegetarian. But being a driven woman, I hunted down one of the founders of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. They put him together, and he was a professor at Oxford. So I drove to him, and I cornered him, and I remember said, just tell me what this does in the brain, because if I can't see it or I don't taste it, I don't buy it. Don't wave some angel cards at me. You have about 30 seconds, and go. And so he said, kind of, a little arrogant, he said, if I wanted to learn about what goes on in the brain, I'd have to get into Oxford and get my master's. And so I did, and nobody was as surprised as that man. So for my master's, aside from having to do a dissertation, I performed my practical as a one-woman show combining neuroscience and comedy. And out of that came a new career. I always say, if you've got an illness, use it. So, and this is probably the best phase of my life right now, and it makes all the pushing and failing worth it. So really, if I can make that quantum leap from being an academic below sea level in high school to becoming chancellor of this very prestigious university, where my son went to study physics, which led to a fantastic career in IT, anybody can. I leave you with this, okay? Embrace all your failures, and if you don't fit in the box, that's great. Invent your new one. And if you find a flame that lights up your brain, that's all that matters, and this splendid university can ignite it. My latest leap in my multi-careered life is that I created something called, and this is my baby now, Frazzled Cafes. and how they came about, it's at the end of all my shows for the last 12 years. I would do the show, then there'd be an interval, then they'd all come back, and we'd have a discussion. And these are big theaters. And now more and more people stand up. I mean, even if it's 1,000, they're brave, and they stand up because people just want to be heard, and they want to feel like people care. And sadly, there's no community, so there was no other place. They have to do it in a theater. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna make places where people can feel safe, not a theater, in small clusters, because that's us humans at our best when we're in small tribes. That's where we began, and we've lost that. So I went in originally partnership with Marks and Spencer's, and now they're all over the place, and they've been the Frazzle cafes are in their cafes. We invite people, it's free, you get free coffees and cookies, and there's a facilitator who's trained in mental health, and then small groups of people meet there where they can speak human, you understand, as opposed to going to cocktail parties and having to ask how your kids are, like you care. Okay, and this is, I mean, I love these meetings. This is where people feel safe, and they can really speak from the heart. And we say, this is where it's okay to not be okay. So I'm very excited to announce that the University of Southampton will become the first university to ever host Frazzle Cafe. With sessions, they're going to... First one is going to be hosted in the new year, so I feel even more connected to the university and to Southampton. So in the end, I'll just say this because I love this expression. This life is a test, only a test. Had it been an actual life, you would have received further instructions on where to go and what to do. So make every moment a masterpiece. Thank you again for this great honor. Thank you.